It's Sunday, September 29, 2024. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minute news. We are continuing our series in conversation with the forensic and social psychiatrist and world expert on violence, Dr. Bandy Lee. Welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Hello.
Now, we are pre-recording this week's episode because you are, as we speak, have just come out the back of this amazing conference that you've been preparing for many weeks, and our viewers have very kindly supported you with that, and we're going to do a full analysis of that next week on the show. So this week I thought we'd start in a slightly different place with our analysis of the mind of Donald Trump, and talk about some of the things that he said at his Pennsylvania rally, but also some things that he's been saying over the last week or two about abortion. He's taken a new direction with this, and claims that women won't think about abortion anymore if he wins the election. Now, this happened a day after Vice President Kamala Harris argued that he was the architect of a reproductive health care crisis. The comments underscored Trump's anxiety, you might say, over the issue of abortion, as he's kind of been flip-flopping and can't really give a straight answer. But he has also, in other interviews, taken full credit and responsibility for overturning Roe versus Wade. So let's look at this line that women won't think about abortion anymore if he wins the election. Where do we start with something as crazy as this?
Well, he's trying to conjure up a fantasy world because he, being untethered from reality, he can promise anything and conjure up any kind of non-reality in order to garner support. That's his purpose, to be able to gather the kinds of adulation, adoration, and support for the presidency that he's been longing for. There is no amount of support that will ever be enough to fulfill his famished sense of self, and so he will say anything and promote any policy. We know that in the 1980s, he was pro-abortion, and he was also a Democrat. Now he is, as you said, responsible for the most draconian abortion laws there have ever been, anti-abortion laws. And now that the results are coming out exactly as predicted, that this is not an issue about saving fetuses or a few fetal cells, but it will result in deaths of many, many women, and lots of hardship for those who should have been aborted because of deformities, illnesses, terminal diseases, would still need to be born, and it will result in lots of suffering and lots of deaths that would not have been necessary. And so now that this information is coming out through the ProPublica investigative reporting and has become widely discussed, he all of a sudden is trying to eliminate abortion altogether from possibility. Of course, that's not a reality.
I wanted to talk about his thoughts and his emotional relationship with women, because this, obviously, it's referenced in the line that women won't have to think about abortion anymore. From an analytical perspective, what he's doing here, with my kind of amateur analysis, he has no respect for women, and therefore their views are devalued in his mind. And he thinks, in the same way that he could close his eyes and think COVID would go away, he thinks that by saying this, that women will no longer think about abortion anymore. He has such a great sense of self and such a minute respect for females, and such little understanding of abortion and how it affects people, but even a woman's monthly cycle, not even thinking about how women think about their body every day. That he has the ego and this great narcissistic sense of self that he can even say something like this and think that people will be like, yeah. I mean, it's remarkable.
Yes, that is partly why he's leading the population into a whole different world where reality and facts would not matter, and whatever he says is the only thing that counts. And that's why he's been preparing people for this, calling actual news fake news. Don't listen to what other people say. Don't trust your own eyes and your ears, but simply listen to me. That is his emotional need, not the need of the people. But he has, through exposure, through many years and lots of forums, he has spread his symptoms, as I have warned all along, that prolonged exposure while he's holding an influential office would result in the spread of symptoms, which I've been calling Trump contagion. And that is being manifested here in that how is this completely untethered person from reality able to run for the presidency and have any viability, let alone be neck and neck with his opponent. And this is exactly why we have been calling this a mental health crisis from the start, that it was a public health emergency. And that now that the symptoms have spread, we are in an acutely dangerous and difficult situation.
So what you're saying is that because we've been listening to this type of rhetoric from him now for nearly a decade, that the contagion has spread to the point that he can say something like women will no longer have to think about abortion, and there isn't the backlash and the response. Because if that was a new candidate saying that, or if it was Kamala Harris saying that, or Tim Walz saying that, or even Joe Biden saying that, the backlash would have been so great that candidate would probably have had to have stepped down. And yet with Donald Trump, he can say anything.
Even Americans, if we had watched Donald Trump speak as he is right now 10 years ago, what would we have thought? We would never have. He would have been off the air in 5 minutes because it would have been just too unthinkable.
Right.
And but it's been this slow progression where he has been allowed to condition his audience to be able to accept anything he says. What he says will no longer matter. He can say anything. In fact, there was a segment in speech, I don't know where it was highlighted, but where it was broadcast, but Steve Schmidt commented on it, that he was saying something like, we need to get rid of them, the immigrants, we need to get rid of them. And then that would easily cross over to we need to eliminate them.
Yeah.
So we can see how the violent insurrection against the U.S. government could happen, and violent attacks of other individuals could easily happen. It's only a matter of a slight shift in his rhetoric now. So we've come to that level of severity and do not recognize it because most people have been conditioned not to trust their own ears and eyes.
So it's like a hyper-normalization of a type of language that in a pre-Donald Trump world would have been seen as extreme hate speech and abuse, and yet 10 years of it tapping away, or in the backs of our minds, or hearing it in the coming out the TV in the corner of the room and not really paying attention. We've all got used to the type of rhetoric that in a parallel universe would have been the stuff of authoritarian, the stuff of dictator, the stuff of despot, but also the stuff of a male chauvinist. And I mean, because if we go back to the abortion quote, women won't have to think about abortion anymore. I mean, is he trying to brainwash people by saying this? Because I feel, we know about him repeating lines in the kind of Hitler style, say it enough times and eventually people will think that it's real or think that it's true. But saying, women, you won't have to think about abortion anymore, and he did repeat that in his speech, is he somehow trying to get to that point where he is using some kind of neuro-linguistic programming to actually have people think that that should be their normal state?
I don't think you'll even need to go into neuro-linguistic programming. Any kind of playbook, even of authoritarians, come out of his natural psychological defenses. So what you were speaking of is actually psychological abuse. He is committing psychological abuse at massive scale, telling people that what they are experiencing is not real. Whatever he says is the only reality. And even as they are being hurt, they're suffering and dying, he is telling them all that is untrue because I do not wish it to be so. And what people see from the outside are this happening in the political scene. It can also happen in work environments, in the home. But what mental health professionals see is the same pattern of psychological aggression, abuse, and violence happening in different settings, but the psychological principles are the same. And because it's coming from such a severe state of pathology, it's the abuse and violence that overrides everything, regardless of the setting where it's occurring. It's no different in the political scene as it is in the domestic setting. It is the same phenomenon, and the management and treatment of it is the same. You have to stop these individuals or they will grow more and more dangerous and uncontainable.
And so women who have been or who are victims of domestic abuse and domestic violence will recognize this pattern of language, especially when it comes to the you don't have to think about abortion anymore.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
That is effectively saying you are not a person anymore.
Exactly, that your experiences do not count. In fact, it was domestic violence survivors and survivors of abuse who have first recognized Donald Trump for who he was. And that's why I was inundated with phone calls, messages the morning after his election, because I'm a violence expert, including domestic violence.
The thing about these subjects is that they don't get enough airtime. And that, you must find this, and it frustrates me all the time, but the level of critical thinking and public discourse in America when it comes to the political discourse here, it's very base level. There's very little interest in the depths and understanding the human behavior. And we talked last week about, climate change. It's not even something that people seem to be discussing here. It's like it's too apocalyptic a conversation for people to have, and the media are, very much at fault with that too. But it seems that things like domestic violence are not conversations that we hear, and therefore people are not necessarily tuned to recognizing an individual, especially a man in this case, who is a violent individual and is using the language of a perpetrator.
Yes.
We need experts to wave the flag.
Yes, absolutely. Our lack of awareness is why it has become so prevalent and so pervasive in almost all our workplaces and institutions. There are almost no places where it does not exist. And we know just how much it can weigh down on human relationships, on work productivity, economic productivity, and even our well-being as a country. And so when we're seeing more mass shootings than there are days in the year, when we see more and more deaths of despair, overdose of substances, and the opioid crisis. All of this is occurring because we are not facing the problem. If we were actually facing the problem and taking steps to resolve it, then we would feel much less helpless. In fact, there's a great deal of hope and encouragement that comes from simply taking steps that will improve things, but we're spending all that energy into denying the problems. That's what's happening with the climate crisis. You've made comparisons with Europe, and I felt that as well. In the early 2000s, whenever I would go to Europe, I went there often. I worked for the French Ministry of Justice and the World Health Organization in Geneva. And whenever I would go there, it would just seem like just fresh air and just the openness to actually addressing the problem instead of trying to control the discourse because you cannot speak about certain issues. And that's how we have dealt with apocalyptic problems. The problems have become apocalyptic because of our refusal to deal with them when they were at manageable levels. That includes Donald Trump's mental impairments. There was a time when the public was quite open to hearing the information and were eager to hear the information. Unfortunately, profit and advantage lay on the side of denial, and the American Psychiatric Association, contrary to its obligation to society and its professional ethical role, served to shut down any discourse that would have served as a means of discussing, understanding, and resolving the problem.
But I should say, because it's something that's always interested me about the American Psychiatric Association. I think you said before that there's only really 6% of people who work as clinicians are actually members of this association. But because it's called an association, and because it has a fancy letterhead, because of the lack of foresight, I don't know, the failure to actually investigate at any level, that's why the TV industry, the media, and some people were like, oh yeah, if they say that you can't talk about this, then it must be true. And to me, that is a real issue with America as a whole. And it's the reason why Donald Trump is allowed to run as president again. Because there is like a fear of authority. And an association, a psychiatric association, represents a level of authority just by nature of its name. And people will not do their due diligence to actually realize that most psychiatrists, psychotherapists, and psychologists are not actually members of this organization.
Well, I resigned from the organization in 2007 because they were getting a third of their revenue from the pharmaceutical industry, and that was reflected in their policies. Yeah. There was a time when they were actually very progressive and advocating of patient rights and doing actually helpful things. And I was a very enthusiastic member, even became a fellow. But when I found out that they had some really odd shifts in their policies that really benefited more medications and the industry of medications rather than actual patient care. And in fact, experiments were done that would be considered torture in the European Union, but they were allowed because the industry was doing it. And I just could not stay with the organization, and it was therefore shocking to me when they used their guild rule, the Goldwater rule, to not only shut me down, but all mental health professionals who didn't have membership with them. And in fact, at that time, so many members even were objecting to the APA's stance. They're changing the Goldwater rule, the ethical guideline about public figures, to become a gag rule with Donald Trump's inauguration. I cannot think of anything more politically motivated and corrupt than to do that when the science and the practice was going in the opposite direction, that we should speak about public figures and that we should inform the public as widely as possible. And they were using such specious reasonings for their change of guideline.
Well, they clearly needed the support of the administration. And I think, because that was the junction, wasn't it? It was like, okay, there's a new president.
Even I was taken in because I could not believe that a psychiatric association would be anti-psychiatry and anti-public health, anti-health and survival of society, because it was quite clear how dangerous this was. And instead, they acted like inside traders who ran with the profit, and they, as a result, received windfalls of federal funding and a new building in the center of Washington, D.C.
But this is just one organization because of Donald Trump. And this is what I think people need to understand. The effect of Trumpism. And we've seen it massively with the Environmental Protection Agency, where the guardrails come down, where there are no protections, where organizations will have to sell their soul to curry favor with the Trump administration, to the detriment of their modus operandi. And that is what's so terrifying going forward, is that we're only speaking about one organization that you have direct experience of. But this is happening to dozens and dozens and dozens of organizations.
Exactly.
And this is the effect of this is the legacy of Donald Trump. They haven't, since Trump left office, they didn't reverse course. And this is something that I think it just doesn't get enough coverage, because it contributes to the downfall of America's values and freedoms and protections.
Exactly. And they are aggressively wanting him back in office because this level of corruption and subversion of institutions is possible under such an impaired person who fervently desires institutions not to work, for scientific organizations to be anti-science, and for reality to be rejected in favor of his preferred worldview.
And that's why the Department of Education is really their first focus. They want to shut that down, because if you can remove the protections of people being educated, then you're not going to have people go, well, hang on a second, that's not right, because there's no thinking, there's no point of reference. And that's my greatest fear. I mean, I saw General Mike Flynn, or whatever he's called these days, being interviewed a few days ago, and he was asked, what would be the first thing you would do under a new Trump administration, or the top three things, and he said, get rid of the Department of Education, get rid of the Department of Education, get rid of the Department of Education.
Right. And you can see from the listeners of your show just how important education is and how much they benefit from education. I get messages all the time now of gratitude for your allowing this level of education on mental health issues, and why it was so important for mental health experts, how we felt that education was critical to the public being empowered, being informed, becoming capable of protecting itself, and instituting, pressuring for policies that will actually improve public health, not damage it the way it has done. And I also salute your listeners, because this is not easy information to listen to.
It requires a level of effort to actually engage at a deeper level. These types of conversations are not frivolous, and they're also not fun, but they are essential.
And it's scary. It's frightening to learn the incredible, as you said, it's truly an apocalyptic problem now because the way it has been allowed to go on, and humanity's survival is at stake, depending on how the election goes. And it's at a precarious place anyway, but with Donald Trump thrown into the mix, it will become vastly more dangerous and unpredictable. And so it's a very frightening topic to consider and discuss. But I would again like to emphasize that it's the fear actually quickly dissipates once we recognize and understand what is happening. And the deeper the understanding, the greater the solutions arise. More solutions become accessible and possible to visualize and implement. And so that's why, as experts, we know how severe the situation is with Donald Trump, but we also know there are solutions. We're eager to share them. And that's why we have so desired to educate the public. The Congress members who met with us encouraged us to educate the public. They said that if we educated the public medically, they would be able to intervene politically. That recommendation surprised me at the time, but now I can see without the education, without the politically neutral, that is, medical neutrality has nothing to do with politics, or it just doesn't enter into the equation. It's purely based on science, facts, and natural phenomena. And without that discourse, everything becomes partisan and everything politically manipulable.
Well, you have to start from a point where people are all on the same page and open to these types of conversations, because otherwise, unfortunately, in this country, people will be like, you're biased, or you're partisan. And I think, as you say, starting by educating people about the issues themselves, about understanding malignant narcissism and understanding this coercive control and the types of things that Donald Trump himself is accused of but clearly presents will make it much easier to then go to the politicians and have them run with it.
And politics was meant to intervene to reality, not just be existing for their own sake and their own power, and also instrumentalizing the public to their own ends, which is what Donald Trump is now doing, and also largely the Trumplican party, as some call it.
Okay, we have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk about not just his language on abortion, but how he has managed to infiltrate the evangelical movement and how we should interpret that. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. Did Rocket Money find any subscriptions you forgot about, or any you paid for twice and didn't realize it? Most Americans think they spend around $62 per month on subscriptions, but the real number is closer to $300. That's a big difference. Even if just a couple of subscriptions fall off your radar, those recurring payments you don't even know about can really add up. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Rocket Money's dashboard gives you a clear view of your expenses across all of your accounts. Easily create a personalized budget with custom categories to help keep your spending on track. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in cancelled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's features. Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/weekend. That's rocketmoney.com/weekend. rocketmoney.com/weekend. Fall can be a stressful season, and stress leads to feeling drained And to maintain your energy levels and a heart-healthy routine, it's best to avoid relying on stimulants. Well, Superbeats Heart Chews offer a convenient, delicious, plant-based way to support healthy blood pressure and circulation. Enjoy a heart-healthy boost without the jitters. Paired with a healthy lifestyle, the unique antioxidant compound in Superbeats is clinically shown to be nearly 2 times more effective at promoting normal blood pressure than a healthy lifestyle alone. With a young family, I'm keen to support my heart, and Superbeats Health Chews enables me to do that. Heart-healthy energy without the crash. Support healthy circulation from a plant-based chew without stimulants or artificial sweeteners or colors. Effective and clinically studied, more doctors, pharmacists, and cardiologists recommend Superbeats for heart health support than any other beet brand. Double your potential with Superbeats Heart Chews. Get a free 30-day supply of Superbeats Heart Chews on all bundles and 15% off your first order by going to getsuperbeats.com and using code WEEKEND. That's getsuperbeets.com using code WEEKEND. We're back on The Weekend Show with Dr. Bandy Lee. I'm Anthony Davis. So Donald Trump needed back in 2016 the evangelical vote in order to win the election, and also the help of Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin, as we now discover. But he himself is not a person of faith. So he has had to fake his religious interest in order to convince people that he is worthy of their vote. It's gone so far now that a lot of evangelical voters claim that he is the chosen one, that he is actually a kind of Messiah character who has risen, and it is God's choice that he should lead America. And we mentioned General Mike Flynn earlier. He, of course, runs these Reawaken America events where he goes around the country preaching politics, but to a religious audience. And so really that separation of church and state does not exist in the Trump Republican Party. And the danger of that is, of course, subjects like abortion become particularly difficult to navigate. So because he needs to appeal to a wider audience, but he also has an evangelical audience who are very much anti-abortion. So how does he navigate this? And maybe you can tell us a little bit about your own experience, because you are also highly qualified in this area as well.
Well, I did do divinity studies at the same time as my medical studies. At that time, I was thinking I wished to humanize my education, my medical education, but it ended up being extremely useful to me as a way of connecting with my patient population, those who are severely ill in state hospitals, or prisoners who are incarcerated and in a crisis. So they often go toward religion, and it gave me a language to speak about with them. And it also gave me a language to reach out to Trump supporters in the very beginning when they were contacting me a lot. I would say that Donald Trump is now converting many of these devout Christians into cult followers, because much of just a tradition of Christianity, or the religion, evangelicalism, and also the Catholic Church, have built in them a kind of authoritarian bent. It's not meant to be. In fact, Christianity is where equality before God and human rights, the concept of human rights arose in the Western culture. So Christianity can be both a source of equality, self-reliance, and democracy, as well as authoritarianism. And nowadays, because religion is not very central in civic life, they have retreated more and more into authoritarianism. And Donald Trump when he says that Christianity matters to him. What matters to him is that authoritarian leaning that where he can easily step in as the savior or Messiah or the second coming of God the way he wishes to be. That's from his developmental wound of not having gone over the stage of the toddler feeling they have to be omnipotent and omniscient in order to fight the feeling of helplessness and needing to be dependent on others for everything. So that's why religion is very attractive to him. And unfortunately, a lot of these religious groups, my colleague at the Harvard program in psychiatry and the law, Steve Hassan, wrote The Cult of Trump, and he outlines that many of these Christian followers are actually not following God or Christ. They're following their leaders, and their leaders are telling them they ought to support Trump. And so they don't question. That's the direction in which they head. And it's ironic because religion in its spirit is meant to set you free. There's a verse in John where it says the truth will make you free. But the way it's been used has been for psychologically subversive reasons of, we've seen the greatest atrocities in history committed under the name of religion and in the name of God. That is because there is a psychological phenomenon called reaction formation, where you, especially when you feel powerless, you invoke the powerful, the God, who you will claim to represent. And so religion provides a great avenue for that kind of expression. But of course, it has nothing to do with the spirit of the religion or the spirit of Christianity or Christ or any of the other religions, which have more commonality than differences, but they have warred against each other in ways that would go against the spirit of those religions. So in 2020, I was actually invited by a Christian psychologist, Chris Thurman. Some may recognize his name. He's an author, and he recognized that I had a Master of Divinity, and he invited me to write a prologue to a book that he organized, and I, as well as Reverend Ron Sider, have helped to put it together, called The Spiritual Danger of Donald Trump, 30 Evangelical Christians on Justice, Truth, and Moral Integrity. So that was a book meant to convince evangelicals and other Christians that this was in no way a Christian presidential candidate. And he continues to be dismayed that his fellow Christians will not see the man for who he is.
I think it's important that we clarify the difference between Christianity in its moderate form and Christian nationalism in its extreme form, because, most regular Christians who have not been brainwashed into the evangelical cult of Donald Trump, they really recognize that Trump is a clear and present danger and has hijacked the religion despite having no faith of his own. And so, it's important for us to say that Christian nationalism is the danger, where you take the religion and you really abuse its teachings. I mean, there's nothing in the Bible about abortion, and yet the Christian nationalist movement has really hijacked that subject and said it is God's will, and yet there really is no connection.
It's coming out more and more. It has nothing to do with abortion. It has to do with control. It has to do with control of women and subjugation and also femicide, which is what anti-abortion is turning out to be. And yes, you're absolutely right. Christian nationalism has nothing to do with Christianity. It also has nothing to do with patriotism. It is about power and control, the psychological abuse we were speaking of, the violence and aggression that are committed in whatever form would manifest in the same way with the same dynamics and the same need to contain.
We're at a bit of a crisis point with this, though, aren't we? Because, part of their plan, and when I say I often think of Steve Bannon in the early days of the Trump presidency, talking about, how you confuse people by flooding the market with misinformation, causing chaos, I think he described it as. And so people don't really know what to think. And so that's why there has become, there has been a kind of complex mix of understanding of, Donald Trump taking Christianity as his, hugging the flag and connecting that to being a good Christian. And yet these things, as you just said, are completely separate. But it's the merging and it's the miscommunication and it's the blurring of lines that I think has made this so hard to understand. And in fact, recently we've seen in Texas people driving their trucks with these American flags with the words Harris Walls, turning this visual of patriotism and Christianity on its head. And so the MAGA Republicans, they hijacked our flag, they hijacked our God. And it's like, no, these things are not exclusive to Donald Trump and his evangelical Christian nationalist voters. This is America and religion, freedom of religion for everybody.
Yes. We have to reclaim these meanings and these concepts because, they will inhabit, pervert, and parasitically take over any positive concepts that we have, because that's how that's what they use to infiltrate society and assert positive image of themselves when in fact they intend to do the opposite. How is a treasonous insurrectionist a person, a patriot, and someone who is running for a top position in government? We have to reground ourselves in reality, and that takes a certain degree of courage, effort, and practice of mental hygiene so that we can take care of our own mental health so that we don't get carried into this dystopian, malignant reality.
There's an area within Catholicism and religion that I don't quite understand because I'm not a person of faith, where, and maybe you can tell me if this kind of helps the kind of MAGA Republican movement, but also people who have abused Christianity to do bad. And that is one of repentance. The idea that, you can go and seek confession, or you can repent for your sins, and that makes everything okay. Because not all religions offer that service, and yet this one does. And it seems to give license to people to do bad, but then to make it right with God.
Well, it could be used either way. It used to be, it's the precursor of psychotherapy, actually. You would go to confession and you would speak about the most hidden, difficult things you have done, because once you confess and once you admit to it, you would be forgiven. So it could be seen as a way of self-reflection, self-awareness, and because you would be embarrassed to go to the priest every week to confess the same thing. You may change your behavior. But it could be, you're right, it could be interpreted another way, where all you need to do is repent, so you can repeatedly commit the same sin and make the same errors. Well, we see Donald Trump continually doing things that would be considered anti-Christian, if not antichrist. The definition of an antichrist in the Bible is one who lies. And here's someone who lies now every word that he speaks. So, yes, it can go either way. And it, as I said, there's nothing so subverted and weaponized as religion, and as well as nothing could be as redemptive for a lot of people.
I saw an interview, I'm not sure from when it was, but Donald Trump was asked if he would repent for anything, or if he felt that there was anything that he'd done in his career or as president that, you know, he would want to do over, and his answer was no. He couldn't bring himself to think of anything that he might have done that he could seek repentance for. And to me, that proved that he is not a person of faith at all. But secondly, it also spoke to the psychological, to the narcissist, and to the ego. What's your making of that?
Yes, that's right. He invokes God and Christianity only to support and buttress himself. He obviously has never read the Bible. When he was asked what his favorite passage was, he just said lots of verses.
And then when he was reading, New or Old, and he said both. And then he said right. he called the Bible his second favorite book after The Art of the Deal. I mean, all of this stuff is pretty blasphemous, isn't it?
And he quotes 2 Corinthians and then holds the Bible upside down when he did that photo op in the at the lawn before the church. So it's very clear that he's only instrumentalizing the religion, but lots of Christians are conditioned to respond to his proclamations of faith and to listen to their leaders who say that he is the chosen one, no matter, God has used imperfect human beings as in divine roles. And so Donald Trump is merely an imperfect human being in a divine role. That is their claim, and people are conditioned to simply go along with what their leaders say instead of thinking for themselves and seeing with their own eyes and hearing with their own ears.
Is that how the sexual abuse from senior figures in the Catholic Church was qualified in the minds of religious people? That these people that God chooses dysfunctional individuals to connect with? I mean, is that how? Because I always wonder how people, kind of religious people, cope with the fact that the prevalent child abuse at the hands of male priests in the Catholic Church, how people of faith kind of manage that in their own minds.
Yes. Well, we've spoken about the power of mental pathology in these sessions a great deal. And so the mind's capacity to convince oneself of the rightness of one's actions, even the most egregious ones, are almost unlimited, especially when they're heinous and severe. And so how did something so horrific as in sexually abusing minors and completely destroying their lives, they may explain it as something, their own loving behaviors, a lot of pedophilic individuals do, but for the victims, it is the worst experience one could possibly have, where it destroys the sense of self, and it is the worst form of soul murder. I see it in the prisons, because the prisoners, they've committed heinous crimes themselves, but the one person they will not stand, and they have a hierarchy among themselves as well. And the lowest of the low are the pedophiles, and they often don't survive in the prison block.
This is also why it was so surprising to many that Donald Trump's Access Hollywood tape didn't seem to lose him any votes with religious voters. The language that he used towards women, the fact that he was laughing it off and thought it was funny, and the fact that he never apologized, never retracted it, and really has only doubled down on this type of language. And to me, him saying that, women, you don't have to think about abortion anymore is actually no different to saying I can grab women by the pussy. I mean, exactly. Really, it's just the same stuff because of his view of women.
Yes, and he does that to any less powerful group. He does that to Blacks and Hispanics. Yes. I've been the best president for Blacks ever, and I've done great things for Hispanics, despite the fact that he has had policies that make them fear for their lives and actually killed off disproportionate numbers in these ethnic groups. So yes. He's also doing the same to women. He despises those without power because he despises himself for being powerless.
And then his weird relationship with his daughter, Ivanka, where we've seen clips through the years of him saying, well, if she was a little older, maybe I'd be dating her. Weird references to her looks and to her body, and doing these things on chat shows. I mean, it's not as if these things have been said in private and then recordings have been released. Actually saying these things on television and not even realizing or appearing to realize how offensive it is both to his daughter but also to people watching.
Yes. I'm going to mention a scandal that will probably break at some point that will be even worse than the Catholic Church, and that is the family courts. Many who have been following me know that I've been speaking up about family courts. These are places where it's an institution that's been set up to try to protect vulnerable individuals, such as women and children, but in fact are predatory against them in the most unbelievable ways. It's the center of human trafficking in the U.S., of trafficking to pedophilic sex rings, to child pornography production. It's now been reported by the United Nations Human Rights Council, where family courts are a dangerous place for women and children. And I feel that these family courts, because there are divorces happening all the time, children are being transferred from one household to another all the time, that this phenomenon is enough to have changed our culture. In fact, when QAnon came out with their conspiracy theories about pedophilic sex rings linked to the Democratic Party, and there were even people showing up at this pizzeria saying that there was a basement where Hillary Clinton was running one of these rings. Whenever there are delusional beliefs that are fixed and unreal, not based on evidence, they don't occur out of nowhere. There usually are reasons, and they're trying to explain something. I believe that because studies are showing more and more that women and children are dying because of family court abuses, they're essentially transferring children from protective, safe, nurturing parents to their abusers, their rapists, batterers, murderers, and their lives are being destroyed at a rate of 160 children per day, every single day. And 1,000 children have been recorded to have died because of family courts. And I have estimated that up to 1/5 of child murder by parent could be prevented if family courts did not exist. And yet, because they're able to do this under judicial power, under judicial authority and guise of being a court, whereas in fact they operate under extreme secrecy, Star Chamber-like secrecy, and then they're untethered from the law and protect one another so that it never gets, they're never held accountable. And so in my experience, I only got into family court in the past couple years. I was mostly in criminal court. Criminal courts are open to the public. I've never appreciated juries so much because usually you have to do a lot of explaining of the fine differences and the professional expert perspective. But now I see that they are the watchdogs of the courts because family courts do not have juries and nobody has access to them. In fact, you can be incarcerated simply for stating anything that happened in your own case, or even what they do to witnesses, to good parents who lost their children, is absolutely atrocious. And young, good mothers, especially, are dying. They're simply dropping dead without any prior heart condition because their children are being transferred to their rapists, batterers, and murderers. And the most dangerous individuals that society produces are experienced firsthand in the home. So it's mothers, women, and children who mostly, sometimes men, who are experiencing this violence firsthand without protection. And once they go to family court to try to gain protection, it's 100-fold worse. And this is what I've been seeing while I've been doing family court cases the last couple years. I've done about 41 cases. 40 of them, the child was taken from the good parent, the nurturing, safe home where they were thriving and healthy, to be given to their abuse and torture and often death or suicide, murder or suicide. And this is because family courts are doing the opposite of what they should be doing and making for themselves a $50 to $175 billion industry. So I mention this because we wonder, why has society become this way? Why do we condone sexual assaulters? Why do we allow for someone with the psychology of Donald Trump to prevail instead of incarcerating him, arresting him, containing him, if not at least hospitalizing him?
And the same could be said, I guess, for school shootings as well. It's remarkable to me that these things are allowed to happen month after month, and yet there's never any legislation or any desire to change that when you're talking about the cold-blooded murder of children in a place that they are supposed to be safe. That, if that's not a mental health contagion, I don't know what is. Right.
So a lot of people are predisposed because of the unspeakable abuse that is occurring. Child abuse is very common. Physical abuse to the point of finding marks on children is 1 in 4. Sexual abuse is to the point of assault or rape is 1 in 5. And we're just mass producing abusers and violent offenders by transferring healthy, good children from good parents to their lifelong sexual slavery, torture that's worse than a life sentence, because these individuals will be beset with physical and psychological problems for life, and their life expectancy is shortened by decades because they die by suicide, murder, they get involved, become violent, they overdose on substances, and also have much higher rates of heart disease, diabetes, or cancer.
Okay. It's a very difficult subject, but again, it's one that never gets any coverage because it's as if it just, it doesn't sell, right? It's not going to, these types of conversations are not going to profit corporate media. And so invariably there isn't enough coverage. We have to take another break, but I want to come back and look at Donald Trump's Pennsylvania rally and analyze some of the language from just a few days ago. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. I've always found it difficult to find clothes that I like to wear. And when I find one thing that works, I just buy loads of them and just wear the same thing all the time. Well, men's closets were due for a radical reinvention, and Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible set of products known to man. And here's why. Rhone helps you get ready for any occasion. The commuter collection offers the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, zips, and polos. You'll never have to worry about what to wear when you've got the Rhone commuter collection. The comfortable four-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy what life throws your way, from your commute to work or your 18 holes of golf. It's time to feel confident without the hassle. With Rhone's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the products. It's that easy. And with Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. And on top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. I personally love a technical fabric, something that is advanced and uses technology to make a more comfortable and more modern outfit. Now, the commuter collection can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. So head to rhone.com/Anthony and use promo code Anthony to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to rhone.com/Anthony and use code Anthony, ANTHONY. It's time to find your corner office comfort. We're back on The Weekend Show with Dr. Bandy Lee. So Donald Trump made his most recent rally appearance in Pennsylvania, and just to watch these rallies in full is not something that many people are doing anymore. I mean, he spoke for nearly an hour and a half. And, let's remember the man is now 78. He is showing clear signs of deterioration. Some clinicians say that dementia is very much, present in the way he presents. But, we don't really talk about the dementia so much on this program because we focus on the mental health aspect. He is clearly becoming more dangerous and more unhinged as he sees the polls. He's probably as obsessed with them. Kamala Harris, polling ahead in most states and even swing states. Only by 1 or 2 points, but it's enough to, piss Donald Trump off, as they say. So his abuse and his rhetoric becomes more extreme. The language of the dictator becomes more and more explicit. What do you think? Because I predict that the graph is going to go, Kamala Harris's star will rise between now and November, and Donald Trump's aggressive abuse and authoritarian language will only increase in line with that. How do you feel that he is coping with the fact that things have changed so much since Joe Biden stepped aside and Kamala Harris stepped up?
Oh, yes, he's had extreme difficulty coping. That is why we were hearing such extreme rhetoric and violent imagery that is depicting what is going on in his head more than anything else. People eating dogs and people eating cats. These kinds of imageries are more illustrative of his state of mind than anything else. Of course, dangerousness and unfitness are mental health evaluations that are functional, so it doesn't really depend on a diagnosis. A diagnosis would be important in terms of prognosis. Dementia, for one, would be important because it's rapidly deteriorating. And he has shown signs of early dementia from the very start of his presidency. He was never cognitively normal. And now we see deterioration, and especially in the early stages, it manifests in terms of greater impulsivity and less inhibition. And so his symptoms of dangerousness, the malignant narcissism you spoke of, and and the psychopathic features that I'm most concerned about, because that has a direct correlation to dangerousness. And we did do a psychopathy scale with him, which was truly off the charts. And so that's one of the things that we presented at the conference.
I wanted to reference one thing specifically that he keeps saying, because he is always trying to compare himself to Kamala Harris and claim that he's superior. And, he reads his speeches off the glass teleprompters. But then because he comes off the teleprompter sometimes and goes off on a tangent, at that point he will say, "Isn't it nice to have a president who doesn't need a teleprompter to make a speech?" And everybody cheers, despite the fact that there are two teleprompters right there, which he's been reading from throughout the majority of the speech. This, to me, is an example of how people have been so brainwashed by this guy that he can even tell them something is different to what they're seeing with their own eyes.
Exactly. That's what I've been warning against, that this is the effect of Trump contagion. What is reality, or what people used to prefer or laud, not having teleprompters, it probably didn't even occur to people before. But once he speaks it, it's not the content he speaks about, but the emotional bonds that he has formed and the symptoms he's transmitting, his false beliefs, no matter how outlandish, and actually the bigger the lie, the more delusional the belief, the more it will spread. So you're correct in that he will deteriorate up until the time of election, and Kamala Harris will probably ascend in her with exposure, with practice, and with greater resolve. But which way the electorate will go depends on a whole other equation. And that's Trump contagion, which I explain in my book, The Psychology of Trump Contagion. I've also been doing a video series that people can access through my Substack newsletter, trying to explain this in far greater detail. I'll do it in these series as well, but that's devoted exclusively to why people are adhering to him and supporting him despite being abused by him and despite being called on and pressured to sacrifice their livelihoods, their personality, their lives, and even their survival, as we have seen under the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's not anything rational that will change their adherence to him.
You mentioned during the debate with Kamala Harris, he talked about people's dogs and cats being eaten by Haitian migrants in Springfield, Ohio. That now, off the back of local law enforcement or prosecutors failing to do anything about that, the Haitian people have actually taken it upon themselves now to seek a prosecution and to, call for him and J.D. Vance to be arrested for their use of language in that way. But just going back to the Pennsylvania rally on Monday, he doubled down on this, despite all the negative press about his abuse of Haitian migrants living legally in Springfield. And he said, "Has your beautiful town changed?" And he said, he basically said that, Springfield wasn't on the map till he put it there and nobody had even heard of it. And his use of language towards immigrants, he's saying they're coming from Asia, they're coming from Africa, like there's no attention to detail. It is this kind of blanket abuse of anybody who is clearly not white. And, I really feel, as a kind of migrant myself, I really feel the sadness that it must kind of cause in people who have come to the United States to seek a better life, to contribute, to work, to do the right thing, who respect America. That is the majority of immigrants, whether they come as asylum seekers or through legal immigration. you come here to be part of America and to celebrate America. And he does not, despite all this talk of patriotism, he doesn't seem to realize that that is the reason his own family came to the US from Germany. It's this denial of the whole point of immigration. You move to improve your circumstances. You don't move because you want to bring drugs and you want to rape and you want to be violent, especially if you come with your family. And that is why I think for the Haitian community who live very well in Springfield, Ohio, amongst the traditional Ohioans, it is such a difficult thing to hear from this man over and over again.
Well, I have sometimes defined democracy as the ability of the leader to allow others to live and let live. Because he himself, we know how he separated small children from their caregivers at the U.S.-Mexico border. He wants to punish them. What we are seeing is that what he did not have as a child, he cannot allow others to have. And what he is not living now, because he's clearly not a happy man, he cannot allow others to have. And that is why it doesn't almost matter which group it is. He needs an object to which to place his anger and blame, his vengeance for what he feels he deserves, but never has never had, the famished self that will never be satisfied unless he gets treatment. But of course, treatment is the last thing he will seek. And instead, he will seek power, authority, violence, means of the greatest military and war-making powers, as well as nuclear weapons. He keeps touting himself as a peace president, but that's the last thing he is. Everything about him is about vengeance and war.
He also said our country is full. We don't want people coming up here. Our country is full. We want Mexico to stop. We want all of them to stop. Our country is packed to the gills. We don't want them coming up. I mean, again, if anyone's ever taken a flight over the US, and I did recently and looked at how vast the landmass is of the United States and how little of it is actually occupied by humans and communities. He spends enough time in Trump Force One to know that really we have a lot of room for people, and how immigrants themselves can grow cities and construct hospitals and be part of the growth of this nation. And all of that is denied. This is purely racism, isn't it? I mean, it's not about the country being full.
Of course not. It has nothing to do with reality. And he simply cannot tolerate people. He cannot tolerate the fact that other people have what he does not have, which is the capacity for love and connection. And he feels left out. And this is his way of eliminating, destroying what he cannot have. And there may be a hierarchy, because the weaker and the more powerless the group, the more he will persecute them. But eventually it will include all, and include himself.
He complains, I'll just quote him again from the rally. He said, "I had such an easy life. People say I had such an easy life. Who the hell knew it was going to be this difficult? But I love it." This has been a theme, isn't it? Complaining that his life before running for president in 2016 was so perfect, he could do what he wanted, and now this burden of the presidency and having to run is something that people should feel sorry for him for, despite all the trappings and the great riches and the security detail and everything that goes with that. I mean, this is just so weird, isn't it? And yet, his supporters, and I've heard them say when interviewed at rallies, well, he gave up a great life for this.
Well, that's the image he's trying to project, and he succeeds because he is masterful at shaping his image. Because when you don't have actual substance, it's very easy to concoct an image to whatever formula you believe that people desire. And so that's why these individuals are so beguiling. They're called spellbinders. They are hypnotizing because they know exactly what to say and exactly how to shape things, even negative facts about him. He turns around and makes them positive for him. Impeachments he turned into his persecution. The insurrection he turned into a surge of patriotism.
Yes, martyrdom.
And his extremely aggressive, dangerous candidacy he's framing as saving the nation.
Finally, let's talk to the people who write to us. And I'm sure you get as many comments as I do of people saying, yes, but what can we do about this? Because people are seeing their own families split up by this support for Donald Trump versus the support for freedom and democracy and business as usual. And I know deep in my heart that America will not choose authoritarianism. But to get there, a lot of families have been split up and a lot of friendships have been broken. And how, in your view, is the best way to communicate with and to deal with people who are adamant that Donald Trump is their messiah, is their savior, and is the rightful president, even during this period of the administration?
Yes. I too have been receiving those messages, and they would comprise the majority of messages I receive, the suffering people are feeling because of they've essentially lost family members and lost friendships and cherished relationships because of the Trump contagion. And, what can be done? First of all, it's very encouraging that people are listening to these programs. In fact, many have messaged me that it helps explain what has happened to their family members and their friends and their lovers. So that understanding is a crucial first step. In fact, it seems that it isn't action at the moment, so it doesn't seem like very much, but I would say it is about 90 to 95% of the solution, a proper understanding. Once we have a proper understanding, then solutions will arise in all different directions, at all different levels. Because like any public health problem, it's an ecological problem. And it has causes at multiple levels, but it also has solutions at multiple levels, at the individual, family, community, society. So what can people do in their everyday life? Well, simply knowing what is happening first helps them guard their own mental health. They will keep their grounding in reality. They will understand that this is a contagious process. It's a transmission of mental symptoms, not their loved one's true personality. There's actually a great film by now a friend of mine, Jen Senko, called The Brainwashing of My Dad. It was about Fox News and its influence on her father, who had turned into a rabid right-wing conspiracy theorist.
Well, he commuted, didn't he? And I think it was the Rush Limbaugh radio show that really got him, wasn't it? I think he got a new job out of town, and every day he would drive an hour and a half each way, listening to this far-right extremist rhetoric. And the guy went from being a liberal to being an extreme anti-immigrant, anti-minority individual.
A very angry and intolerant person you could no longer relate with, and then that transferred over to Fox News. And when he was ill, and I think they turned off all his devices then he returned to his original personality. And there's a level of regret in the film of how so many years were lost. It is like losing a family member to a cult. In my view, it's losing them to mental symptoms. I've dealt with families where family members have turned schizophrenic or manic depressive. We call it bipolar disorder. And it is extremely taxing, exhausting, and ultimately sometimes impossible for the family members to be able to continue living with that person. It's an extremely painful process. And to think that this is happening all over the country because we have allowed a severely mentally impaired person into a high office for 4 years without intervention, and then allowed him to continue to have exposure, to continue to spread his symptoms. He's going to be motivated, like nothing else, by his symptoms to spread them, to harm the population and to bring it to its destruction. That is the role of mental pathology. And that is why mental pathology is different from just another political ideology, and why it's important for health professionals, specifically mental health professionals, to be involved in curbing the spread. But that has not happened until this time. So hopefully these sessions will inform people. What they can immediately do is simply be aware that this is a contagious process. What's actually good about it is that once the offending agent or the primary individual with the symptoms is removed from exposure, a lot of the symptoms dissipate. People return to their normal state, just like the father in the film. And
so turn off the TV, turn off the right-wing radio. Don't give them access to the materials that is doing the brainwashing.
Well, if they were taken to the wilderness where they don't have access to electronics or television, then it could probably work individually. But yes, right now it's very difficult because it's nationally, people are obsessed and people are addicted to him because that is what the symptoms have induced them to how they behave based on their exposure. And so giving their family members a place to return to, that they do not have to stay with this individual, giving them, extending a human hand because they're adhering to him because he's told them there's no place else to go, that they're going to be ridiculed, rejected. So countering that and just letting them know that you are there if they chose to return. If they would like to have a relationship outside of politics, they don't have to talk about politics all the time and get back in touch with the human connection that they have. That's how I reached out to Trump supporters in the very beginning. And there was almost no exception as to building a relationship with each one of them. That changed over the course of the Trump presidency as the symptoms grew more severe and the racism more rabid, and their inability to open their own eyes and their own ears to be able to have a direct experience of another human being is what made them incapable of being reached out to even by someone like myself, a trained psychiatrist. So that human connection will go a long way and maybe their salvation.
Okay. It's great advice, and we are very grateful to you for your time and for your expertise. But for now, Dr. Bandy Lee, thanks for joining The Weekend Show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. You can see more from me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll come back next Sunday with Dr Bandy Lee as we reflect on her conference on the dangerous case of Donald Trump. We'll do that next week here on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.